The early autumn sun cast a warm, amber glow over Maplewood, illuminating the quiet suburban neighborhood with a softness that almost made the world feel untouched. Maplewood was known for its tree-lined streets, quaint coffee shops, and perfectly maintained parks, the type of community where people prided themselves on their hospitality and sense of security. But not everyone felt welcome here, and today, Special Agent Lisa Mitchell would confront that reality head-on. Lisa had dedicated most of her life to her career in the FBI, working long hours and often putting herself in dangerous situations, all in pursuit of justice. She was a firm believer in the system's potential to protect and serve, despite knowing the blind spots in the promise of equality. But today was supposed to be different, a rare day off to escape her usual intensity. She had decided to go for a peaceful walk, craving a moment's silence to clear her mind. As she strolled through Maplewood's main park, Lisa breathed in the crisp air and took in her surroundings. Families were scattered across the grassy fields, some picnicking while others played games. The laughter of children mixed with the sounds of leaves rustling in the trees, creating a serene atmosphere that Lisa rarely had the chance to enjoy. Her thoughts drifted to the pressures of her job and how challenging it was to carve out time for herself. For once, she felt at ease, until she noticed the unmistakable sight of a police cruiser parked near the park's edge. She felt her shoulders tense slightly, a reflex she couldn't ignore. She had seen enough racial profiling incidents, both as a witness and a victim, to recognize the subtle but persistent biases that often lingered in certain communities. Inside the cruiser, Officer David Jenkins sat in the driver's seat, his eyes scanning the park like a hawk on the hunt. Lisa couldn't help but notice how he lingered on individuals who looked like her. Black men, young boys, and families. She knew of Jenkins by reputation. He was known around Maplewood for stopping people based on suspicion alone, especially those who didn't look like they belonged in the area. This knowledge sparked a flicker of unease within her, but she brushed it off, focusing instead on enjoying her day. Lisa kept walking, hoping to avoid any unwanted attention, but she could feel Jenkins's gaze lock onto her as she passed. Her instincts sharpened. She straightened her back, keeping her posture relaxed and her pace even. After all, she had nothing to hide, and she wasn't about to let anyone make her feel otherwise. But Jenkins's voice cut through the peaceful morning air, carrying an edge of authority that was unmistakable. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" Lisa's heart skipped a beat as she stopped, her gaze meeting Jenkins's unyielding stare. She had been in high-pressure situations before, far worse than this, but something about this encounter sent a wave of unease washing over her. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, keeping her tone calm and measured. She knew the importance of staying composed in these situations. Jenkins strode towards her with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, his hand resting on his belt. He looked her up and down, as if assessing her for something hidden, something he wanted to find. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, his tone dripping with accusation. His eyes narrowed as he looked her up and down, as though her presence here was an offense in itself. Caught off guard by the hostility, Lisa took a steadying breath, schooling herself to stay calm. "I'm just taking a walk," she replied, her voice steady but respectful. "I live a few blocks away." Jenkins's sneer was quick and dismissive. "You don't belong around here. This neighborhood's not for people just wandering around without a reason." His tone was laced with suspicion, and his words hung heavy in the air. Lisa felt her pulse quicken. She knew exactly what this was, and it was an all-too-familiar feeling. Keeping her voice even, she replied, "Like I said, I live nearby. I'm not causing any trouble." Jenkins crossed his arms and took a step closer, breaching her personal space. "You look suspicious to me," he said coldly, his gaze never wavering. "Why don't you show me some ID?" Lisa's stomach churned, but she fought to keep her expression neutral. She wasn't doing anything wrong. Yet here she was, being asked to prove her right to exist in this space. She knew if she resisted, this could escalate quickly, but giving in felt like a betrayal of her dignity. "I'm not doing anything illegal," she replied, voice steady but firm. "I don't see why I should need to show you my ID just to go for a walk." Jenkins's face hardened, the look of a man who didn't like being questioned. "Are you refusing to cooperate?" he challenged, his tone turning menacing. His hand moved toward his radio, his fingers hovering over the button, ready to call for backup. Lisa recognized the threat in his stance. Pushing back could make this worse, and she didn't want the situation to spiral out of control. She took a deep breath, trying to quell the anger rising in her chest. "Look, I'm not causing any trouble here," she said carefully. "I'll show you my ID if that'll clear this up." She reached for her bag, moving slowly to avoid alarming him. But Jenkins took a step back, his hand up as if to ward off a threat. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he barked, his voice tinged with a warning. Lisa's patience was wearing thin. Here she was, an FBI agent trained in de-escalation and conflict resolution, being treated like a criminal in her own neighborhood. The anger simmered, but she forced herself to remain calm. She wasn't just a black woman out for a walk. She was a federal agent, and she wasn't about to let this slide. "Officer," she said, her tone steady but unmistakably firm. "I'm Special Agent Lisa Mitchell with the FBI." She pulled her ID from her bag and held it up for him to see. "You're making a mistake here." For a brief moment, a flicker of shock crossed Jenkins's face. He hadn't expected that, but almost as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by a mix of pride and indignation. Rather than backing down, his expression grew colder. "Yeah, right," he muttered, his voice laced with contempt, trying to pull rank. "Huh? Well, I don't care who you say you are." His hand rested on his belt, fingers hovering over his cuffs as he took another step forward. Lisa's patience finally wore thin. "Why would I lie about who I am? This is harassment," she said, her tone resolute. She could see Jenkins's pride flaring, his authority questioned, and with that, she knew this wasn't going to end here. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Lisa braced herself for what would come next. She was ready to stand her ground, no matter how far Jenkins was willing to take this confrontation. The quiet of the park felt like it had been shattered, as though the air itself was holding its breath. Tense and waiting, Special Agent Lisa Mitchell stood her ground, her FBI badge held firmly in her hand, her expression unwavering as she faced Officer David Jenkins. Despite her years of service, her calm demeanor, and her willingness to de-escalate, Jenkins seemed blind to it all. He only saw what he wanted to see. Someone who didn't belong. Lisa took a steadying breath. "Officer Jenkins, this is my ID. I am Special Agent Lisa Mitchell with the FBI, and I'd appreciate it if you would call your supervisor. I'm more than willing to clear this up." But Jenkins didn't so much as glance at her badge. Instead, his eyes were fixed on her face, his jaw clenched tight, as if her presence and her words were somehow challenging his authority. The hint of doubt that had flickered across his face moments earlier was gone, replaced by a look of hardened resolve. "Nice try," he sneered. "I don't care if you've got a badge from some Halloween store. This is my jurisdiction, and I don't answer to fake IDs." His voice grew louder, his posture more imposing, as though trying to convince himself of his own authority. "You people always think you can talk your way out of things." Lisa felt her pulse quicken, her anger flaring beneath her calm exterior. "You people." The words hit like a slap, and she forced herself to hold her composure, knowing any outward sign of frustration could escalate this situation. "I'm not here to talk my way out of anything," she replied, keeping her tone as even as possible. "I'm simply out for a walk. This misunderstanding can be resolved if you just call your supervisor." Jenkins scoffed, his hand now hovering near his radio. "So now you're going to tell me how to do my job? Huh? I don't need to call anyone. I know a criminal when I see one. And right now, you're resisting and obstructing justice." He spat the words with venom, and Lisa felt a spark of disbelief mixed with anger. This man was clearly determined to put her in her place, no matter how baseless his accusations were. "Officer Jenkins, please, I'm not resisting anything. I've been cooperating with you fully," Lisa said, her tone more forceful now. She could feel her patience slipping, but she knew she had to stay controlled. But Jenkins wasn't listening. His mind seemed made up. "Enough! I told you to step away from the bag and show your hands." He moved toward her with purpose, reaching for the handcuffs on his belt. "Consider this your last warning." Lisa felt her stomach drop. This was really happening, despite every step she'd taken to comply, to de-escalate, and to remain calm. He was determined to make her a target. In that moment, she realized it wasn't just her he saw. She represented every preconceived notion he had, every stereotype he was determined to uphold. "Officer Jenkins," she said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "You're making a mistake. You're about to arrest an FBI agent with no cause. This is harassment, and I won't let it go unaddressed." Jenkins's expression darkened. He seemed enraged by her confidence, her unwillingness to shrink under his authority. He took a step closer, handcuffs in hand, and before she could react, he grabbed her wrist with a rough grip. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice," he declared, his voice ringing through the now quiet park. The cold metal of the handcuffs pressed against her skin, and Lisa felt a sharp stab of humiliation, anger, and disbelief. This was a nightmare, one she'd witnessed happen to others, one she'd fought against in her career, and yet, here she was, cuffed in a public park. Professional, educated black woman who had done everything right, still treated like a criminal. "Officer Jenkins, you don't have the right," she started, her voice laced with fury and desperation. But Jenkins cut her off. "I don't have the right? That's funny," he sneered, tightening his grip on her wrist as he began to lead her toward the cruiser. "You should have thought of that before you started causing trouble." As they walked, Lisa felt every eye in the park turn toward her. A couple pushing a stroller stopped in their tracks, staring at her as if she were some kind of threat. A group of teenagers glanced over, whispering among themselves, their expressions a mix of shock and fascination. She had trained for high-stakes situations and dealt with dangerous criminals. Yet never had she felt so exposed, so stripped of her identity and her dignity. Jenkins opened the cruiser door and shoved her into the back seat. The familiar interior, a place she'd ridden countless times alongside other agents, felt foreign, suffocating. She leaned back, gripping the cold cuffs with her hands behind her, forcing herself to breathe deeply, to keep her thoughts clear. "This isn't over," she told herself, not by a long shot. As Jenkins climbed into the front seat, he started the engine, casting a smug glance back at her. "So, FBI? Huh?" he said, smirking as if he didn't believe a word of it. "Bet you'll be singing a different tune when you're in front of the judge." Lisa didn't respond. She refused to give him the satisfaction. But inside, her mind was racing. She thought of her unborn child, her family, and the countless people who faced this kind of injustice every day. She would not let this end here. She was determined to expose this injustice for what it was. The drive to the precinct was agonizingly slow, every passing second dragging as she steeled herself for what lay ahead. When they finally arrived, Jenkins parked with an air of triumph, as if he'd just apprehended a dangerous felon. Stepping out, he yanked her from the back seat, guiding her into the station with a firm grip. Inside, the atmosphere changed. Officers at the front desk glanced up, surprise flickering across their faces at the sight of Jenkins bringing in a woman in handcuffs. One officer, who looked slightly younger, frowned, his gaze shifting between Jenkins and Lisa. "What's going on here?" he asked, eyebrows raised in concern. "Just another arrest," Jenkins replied with a shrug, clearly enjoying the attention. This one was causing trouble in the park. The younger officer's expression tightened as he looked at Lisa. Catching her eyes, she gave him a steady look, silently conveying the injustice of the situation. She could tell he was skeptical, perhaps even concerned, but he kept his mouth shut, clearly unwilling to confront Jenkins. They moved past the desk, Jenkins pulling her into the booking area. Lisa fought to keep her emotions in check, the mixture of rage and humiliation twisting painfully in her chest. She knew she had to stay composed, to focus on the steps ahead. As Jenkins started filling out paperwork, she took a deep breath, preparing to speak up once more. "You really need to call your supervisor, Officer Jenkins," she said, her voice steely. "You're violating my rights, and this will not go without consequence." Jenkins didn't even look up. "Not my problem. You'll have your chance to explain when you're in front of a judge," he muttered, clearly unmoved, frustrated. Lisa leaned forward, locking her gaze on him. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she warned, her tone low but powerful. "This is a mistake that will cost you." For the first time, a hint of uncertainty crept into Jenkins's eyes, but he quickly masked it. Shrugging off her words, he scribbled the last line on his paperwork, glancing up to meet her gaze with a defiant glare. "Nice try," he said, "but you don't scare me." But before he could say another word, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway, and Lisa felt a flicker of hope. She knew that step. She'd worked alongside it countless times. Special Agent Carter strode into the room, his expression like a thundercloud, his gaze locking on Jenkins with an intensity that made the officer falter. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Jenkins straightened, momentarily caught off guard. This woman, she was causing a disturbance in the park. "And this woman is an FBI agent," Carter interrupted, his tone dangerously calm. "And unless you want to face immediate disciplinary action, I suggest you get those cuffs off her now." The color drained from Jenkins's face as he fumbled for the keys, his bravado slipping away with each second. As he unlocked the cuffs, Lisa held his gaze, her anger tempered with a sense of victory. He had tried to undermine her, to strip away her dignity. But here she was, standing tall and unbroken. "You're going to answer for this," she said quietly, her voice full of unshakable resolve. Carter nodded, his expression unyielding. "We'll be filing a complaint. Jenkins, today, you crossed a line, and you're going to be held accountable." As the realization of his mistake settled over Jenkins, Lisa felt the weight of his prejudice and arrogance finally starting to lift. This wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had been wronged, about standing up against the very injustices she had dedicated her life to fighting. And as she walked out of the station, her resolve stronger than ever, she knew this was only the beginning. The morning sun was beginning to break over Maplewood as Lisa sat in a quiet room at the FBI's regional office, her hands resting on her knees, fingers interlaced to steady herself. The events of the previous day played in her mind like a twisted reel, each memory of Officer Jenkins's sneer and harsh words stinging fresh. She had faced high-stakes situations before, but the humiliation and frustration of being handcuffed and dismissed like a criminal on a leisurely stroll through her own neighborhood had shaken her deeply. Across from her sat Special Agent Carter, his expression somber but resolute. He had worked with Lisa for years, respecting her not only for her skill but also for the dignity with which she handled herself, even in the most challenging cases. Today, however, he was looking at her with an empathy she rarely allowed herself to see in others. "Lisa," he said quietly, his voice breaking the silence, "I can't even begin to tell you how sorry I am. You should never have been subjected to that. None of us should." Lisa took a steadying breath, managing a faint nod. "Thank you, Carter. I appreciate you stepping in when you did. If you hadn't come in at that moment, I don't know what might have happened." She looked down at her hands. "But it's not just about me, is it? Jenkins's actions aren't an isolated incident. And if he treated me like that, You can bet he's done worse to people who don't have a badge to fall back on.
Carter sighed.
Leaning forward with a look of grim determination. You're absolutely right. This isn't the first time I've heard complaints about him. Though most were swept under the rug or settled quietly. The difference here is that we have the leverage to expose this. Your arrest was wrong. It was rooted in prejudice. And I intend to help you make sure he's held accountable. Lisa's gaze shifted to meet Carter's, a spark of hope flickering in her eyes. Then let's make sure this doesn't end here, she replied. I don't want this to just be about one man's actions. This is a chance to address the system that lets officers like Jenkins act this way without facing real consequences. Carter nodded, already reaching for his phone. Let's get this documented. The first step is filing a formal complaint with the Baywood Police Department, and from there, we'll push for an internal investigation, not just into Jenkins's record, but the department's handling of complaints like these. They spent the next few hours drafting statements, recalling each detail of the incident from Lisa's initial encounter with Jenkins to the tense moments in the precinct. Every word was scrutinized to ensure they captured the severity of what she had endured. As they worked, Rebecca Chin, another trusted colleague and a skilled investigator, entered the room, carrying a stack of files. Hey, I heard what happened, Rebecca said, her voice filled with sympathy as she took a seat next to Lisa. I can't believe Jenkins went that far. This has to be addressed properly. It will be, Lisa replied, nodding gratefully. I want to make sure it's thorough, not just for me, but for everyone who's been affected by this. Rebecca opened the files she'd brought, revealing a compilation of prior complaints against Jenkins, incidents of excessive force, and reports of racial profiling that had been quietly shelved over the years. Here's what I could find on short notice, she said. These complaints never saw the light of day, but this time, we'll make sure it's different. As they sifted through the documents, each new account fueled Lisa's anger and resolve. There were dozens of stories of unwarranted stops, verbal abuse, and even accusations of physical intimidation. Most victims were people of color, residents who were simply trying to go about their day. This is unacceptable, Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with intensity. He's been getting away with this for years, and it's been ignored or excused every time. Carter exchanged a look with Rebecca, his jaw set with grim determination. No more, he said firmly. This time, we'll use every resource we have to make sure the Baywood PD can't just brush this under the rug. Rebecca leaned forward, flipping to another page. The news is starting to spread. Social media is already blowing up with stories similar to yours. Lisa, people are finally speaking out. This isn't just about one rogue cop anymore. It's become a rallying cry. As they reviewed the files, the weight of the situation pressed down on them. It was more than a single case of misconduct. It was a systemic issue, deeply embedded and repeatedly swept aside. And now, as people came forward with their own stories, the momentum for change began to swell. Let's schedule a press conference, Carter suggested, looking directly at Lisa. We need to control the narrative. If we get ahead of this, we can use it as a platform to highlight the systemic issues and push for real reform. Lisa took a moment to consider it, realizing the magnitude of what a press conference would entail. She would be putting her story out there, exposing herself to scrutiny and possible retaliation. But this was bigger than her, and she knew it. You're right, she said finally. We need to shine a light on this, not just for me but for everyone who's been treated like this. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle over her. I'll do it, Rebecca smiled, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We've got your back. Lisa, the community's with you on this too. Social media is exploding with support. This story is hitting a nerve, and people are demanding change. Together, they spent the rest of the day preparing for the press conference, drafting statements and gathering testimonials. Carter reached out to legal advisors, ensuring they had every detail lined up. every complaint documented and supported. They planned to demand not only Jenkins's suspension but also a full review of the Baywood Police Department's practices around racial profiling and officer accountability. The following morning, as Lisa stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her suit jacket and steeling herself for what was to come, a sense of determination settled over her. This was the moment she had to push back, to give voice to those who'd been silenced or dismissed. She wasn't just representing herself. She was representing every person who had suffered in silence. She arrived at the press conference, the modest room already crowded with reporters and community members. Cameras flashed as she stepped up to the podium, and murmurs filled the room, her story already sparking interest and indignation among those who had followed it. Standing beside her were Carter and Rebecca, their faces a mixture of support and resolve. As Lisa faced the crowd, she felt a surge of strength, a sense of purpose she had never felt so strongly before. Clearing her throat, she began, her voice strong and unwavering. "Good morning. My name is Lisa Mitchell, and I am a special agent with the FBI. Yesterday, I was wrongfully arrested while taking a walk in my own neighborhood, detained by an officer who chose to see only the color of my skin and not the person I am or the badge I carry." The room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. She continued, her tone steady but filled with purpose. "This incident is not an isolated event. It is part of a much larger, systemic problem that has affected countless individuals in our community. People who have been harassed, humiliated, and mistreated because of outdated, biased views that should have no place in our society." She paused, scanning the crowd, meeting the eyes of those who looked back at her with empathy and understanding. "I am not speaking out today just for myself. I am here for every person who has endured this kind of treatment in silence. This is a call for accountability, not just for one officer, but for an entire system that has allowed this kind of behavior to persist." Reporters' hands shot up, and questions came at her in a flurry. "Agent Mitchell, how do you plan to address this moving forward?" one asked, while another shouted, "Do you believe the department will respond with concrete action?" Lisa looked back at the cameras, her expression resolute. "I intend to push for a full investigation, not only into Officer Jenkins's actions but into the department's handling of all complaints against its officers. We need transparency, accountability, and training that goes beyond words on paper. This isn't about one officer's mistake. It's about ensuring that no one else is ever treated this way again." As she finished speaking, applause erupted from the crowd, and she felt a swell of encouragement from the community standing behind her. Her heart pounded with adrenaline, and she knew that this was only the beginning. There would be hurdles, opposition, and resistance, but for the first time, she felt the unstoppable force of a movement taking shape. Beside her, Carter and Rebecca exchanged looks of pride and determination, their support unwavering. Lisa stepped down from the podium, feeling the strength of a community united, ready to demand justice and accountability. This was far from over, and she was prepared to see it through. The press conference's reverberations could be felt across Baywood and far beyond, transforming Lisa's arrest from a personal injustice into a rallying cry for reform. News outlets picked up the story, and social media platforms were flooded with hashtags like #JusticeForLisa and #EndRacialProfiling. Lisa's face was plastered across headlines, her determined expression becoming a symbol of resilience against the systemic racism she was now actively challenging. That evening, as Lisa returned home, she finally allowed herself to feel the exhaustion that had crept over her since the incident. The past few days had been a whirlwind of humiliation, anger, and action. She leaned against her kitchen counter, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders, realizing that this wasn't going to be a simple fight. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Rebecca Chin standing there, holding a paper bag and 2 steaming cups of coffee. "I figured you could use some company," Rebecca said with a small smile. "Thank you, Rebecca," Lisa replied, her voice warm with appreciation. I could definitely use it. They settled at her kitchen table, and Rebecca handed her one of the coffees. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in thought. You know, Lisa, Rebecca finally said, her tone thoughtful. When I heard about what happened, I wasn't just shocked, I was furious. It's beyond unfair. But seeing you take control at that press conference, it was inspiring. Lisa managed a small smile. Thanks, Rebecca. It wasn't easy, but I knew it had to be done. I can't let Jenkins and others like him keep getting away with this. Rebecca nodded. And you're not alone. People are rallying behind you. Did you see the news coverage? They're calling for Jenkins's suspension and for Baywood PD to take responsibility. Lisa sighed, her fingers drumming on the coffee cup. That's the hope, but it's going to take more than a few news stories to make lasting change. There's an entire system at play here that needs to be held accountable. Rebecca's expression turned serious. Well, then let's hold it accountable. Carter's been working on getting access to Jenkins's full record. We've found even more complaints: racial profiling, excessive force, verbal abuse. It's staggering. Lisa's eyes narrowed as she listened, the anger simmering beneath her calm exterior intensifying. It's like he's been given a free pass to terrorize the community, she muttered. He's ruined lives, intimidated innocent people, and it's all been swept under the rug. Rebecca reached into her bag and pulled out a manila folder filled with incident reports and testimonies. These are just some of the reports we managed to find so far. If we can bring all this to light, we might be able to push for a real investigation. Lisa opened the folder and scanned the pages, each one fueling her resolve. She knew that her own case was just the tip of the iceberg, and she was determined to ensure justice not only for herself but for all those Jenkins had mistreated. The two women worked late into the night, compiling evidence and crafting a strategy for the next steps. By the time Rebecca left, the kitchen table was covered in notes, highlighted documents, and a growing list of allies who had offered support. The next morning, Lisa woke to find her phone flooded with messages. News about her case was spreading like wildfire, with journalists, activists, and even community leaders reaching out to express solidarity and offer assistance. She skimmed through the messages, feeling a renewed sense of purpose as she read stories from others who had faced similar injustices. Her phone buzzed, and she saw a message from Special Agent Carter. Meeting at HQ. Updates on Jenkins and our case strategy. Be there by 10. Lisa glanced at the clock. 9:15 a.m. She hurried to get ready, pulling on a sharp blazer, her expression steeling as she prepared for the day ahead. At headquarters, the atmosphere was tense but charged with energy. Carter and Rebecca were already in the meeting room, poring over more documents and strategizing. Carter looked up as she entered, giving her a brief nod of acknowledgement. Glad you could make it, Lisa. We've got a lot to discuss, he said, motioning for her to take a seat. Rebecca passed her a sheet of paper. We've been digging deeper into Jenkins's record. It's worse than we thought. Over a dozen formal complaints, all marked as resolved, without any real investigation. Lisa shook her head, her frustration evident. And this is the person they allow to represent law enforcement? No wonder people don't feel safe. Carter's face darkened. And it's not just Jenkins. The pattern of dismissing complaints against officers has been embedded in the department's culture for years. We're not just looking at one man's actions. We're looking at a systemic issue that goes all the way up. Lisa nodded, feeling the enormity of what they were up against. So, what's the plan? Carter leaned forward, his voice low but determined. First, we push for Jenkins to be placed on administrative leave immediately, pending a formal investigation. Second, we rally community support. We're going to need every voice we can get to demand transparency and accountability. Rebecca added, we're already in contact with community leaders, activists, and legal experts who want to help. We're planning a town hall to give people a platform to share their own stories. It's time the department faces the people it's supposed to protect. Lisa felt a surge of determination as she listened to their plans. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person who had been silenced. Every family that had suffered under a system that allowed officers like Jenkins to abuse their power. "Let's do it," she said firmly. "If this is going to be the start of something bigger, I'm ready to see it through." The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, planning sessions, and strategy calls. Lisa met with community leaders, attended planning sessions with local activists, and collaborated with her FBI team on gathering evidence. The town hall they organized was set for the end of the week, and word spread quickly throughout Baywood. On the day of the town hall, the community center was packed. People filled every available seat, with some even standing along the walls, their faces filled with anticipation and determination. Cameras from local news stations were positioned around the room, reporters murmuring to one another as they prepared to broadcast the event live. Lisa took a deep breath, steadying herself as she looked out at the crowd. She spotted familiar faces, people she had met over the past few days, each with their own story of mistreatment, each carrying their own burden of frustration and anger. Rebecca gave her an encouraging nod from the front row, and Lisa felt a surge of courage as she stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know many of you have experienced the same frustration, fear, and humiliation that I felt just a few days ago. I was wrongfully arrested, not because of anything I did, but because of who I am, a Black woman who, in the eyes of one officer, didn't belong." A murmur went through the crowd, nods of understanding and shared pain. "I'm here today not just to tell my story but to listen to yours," Lisa continued. "Each of us here knows someone who has been treated unfairly, profiled, or dismissed, and we're here to say enough is enough. We deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. We deserve to feel safe in our own community." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "We're not just fighting for justice in one case. We're fighting to change a system that has allowed this behavior to go unchecked. Together, we're demanding accountability, transparency, and a commitment to protect and serve everyone, not just a select few." The room erupted in applause, a powerful wave of emotion and support washing over her. As Lisa stepped back from the microphone, one by one, others took the stage, sharing their own encounters with Jenkins and officers like him. Each story was a reminder of the deep-rooted issues that had gone unaddressed for too long. By the time the town hall ended, the energy in the room was electric. People stayed, forming groups, discussing ways to stay organized, determined to see their demands met. Lisa felt a renewed sense of hope, an overwhelming feeling that this was the beginning of something bigger than any one of them. As the evening wound down, Carter approached her, a look of pride in his eyes. "You did good tonight, Lisa. This community needs someone like you to lead this fight." Lisa smiled, exhaustion and resolve mingling on her face. "Thank you, Carter, but this is just the start. We have a long road ahead, and I'm ready to take every step." The fight had only just begun, but with a community behind her and a mission driving her forward, Lisa knew she was exactly where she needed to be. By the next morning, Baywood was buzzing. Word of the town hall had spread quickly, and for the first time, people in the community felt the power of collective action. The story of Lisa Mitchell, the FBI agent wrongfully arrested in her own neighborhood, had ignited something far beyond a local grievance. It had become a flashpoint for justice and accountability. Lisa woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing with notifications. She scrolled through her messages, reading support from friends, strangers, community leaders, and even other law enforcement officers who quietly voiced their solidarity. News articles detailed her case, and hashtag Justice for Lisa trended across social media as people shared their outrage and support. Feeling the momentum, Lisa dressed quickly, her mind focused on the day ahead. She was meeting Carter and Rebecca at the FBI office, where they planned to review Jenkins's case and strategize for their next steps. As she entered the meeting room, she could see her colleagues already poring over reports, each of them equally committed to this fight. "Morning, Lisa," Carter greeted her, nodding towards a pile of documents. "Looks like the town hall got the attention we needed. People are rallying around your story." Rebecca glanced up, a determined smile on her face. "The local papers are running editorials calling for Jenkins's suspension, and I've been in touch with several reporters. They're digging into the Baywood PD's history of misconduct complaints." Lisa nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "Then let's keep pushing. If we're going to get real change, we need to make it clear this isn't about just one officer. Jenkins is a symptom of a much larger problem. And the more people know, the harder it'll be for the department to ignore." Carter gestured to a board covered in sticky notes and newspaper clippings. "We've mapped out every complaint against Jenkins and started identifying patterns. There's a clear history of racial profiling and excessive force. We also found 2 older cases where victims tried to press charges, but they were quietly dismissed by the department." Lisa shook her head, her frustration simmering. "He's been protected by the system for years, but now, we have the public on our side. This time, they won't be able to sweep it under the rug." Rebecca crossed her arms, her expression resolute. "We've also started organizing a protest outside the Baywood Police Department. Community leaders, activists, and even a few local officials have agreed to speak. This will send a clear message." Lisa looked at her colleagues, gratitude and determination swelling within her. She had always fought for justice, but this fight was different. This time, it was personal. This time, she had a community standing beside her. The following day, the protest unfolded as planned. The morning air was charged with energy, banners waving in the light breeze as people gathered outside the Baywood Police Department. Lisa stood at the front of the crowd, surrounded by her colleagues, family members, and hundreds of supporters. The sight was both humbling and empowering, a testament to the strength of a united community. As she looked out at the crowd, she saw signs bearing slogans like "End Racial Profiling," "Justice for Lisa," and "Accountability Now." Children sat on their parents' shoulders. Elderly couples held hands, and students gathered in clusters, their voices joining in chants that echoed down the streets. Reporters moved through the crowd, snapping photos and conducting interviews, capturing the moment for the wider world. Rebecca approached Lisa, proud smile on her face. "Look at this. You started something. Lisa, people are here because they believe in you and what you're fighting for." Lisa took a deep breath, steadying herself. "They're here because they want to see change. They want a community where they don't have to live in fear or feel like they're being watched every time they leave their homes." At that moment, Carter stepped up to the makeshift stage, microphone in hand. He cleared his throat, and the crowd's chatter quieted. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice resonating with conviction. "We are here today because of an injustice, because a dedicated FBI agent, a member of this very community, was wrongfully detained, humiliated, and harassed by someone who was supposed to serve and protect. But this isn't just about one person. This is about a system that has failed to hold its officers accountable." The crowd murmured in agreement, their faces serious and resolute. Carter continued, "Our law enforcement agencies must be accountable to the people they serve. We demand a full investigation into Officer Jenkins's actions, as well as a thorough review of every complaint filed against the Baywood Police Department. It's time for transparency. It's time for reform." As Carter stepped aside, Rebecca handed the microphone to Lisa, who felt a surge of emotion as she faced the crowd. Her mind raced with thoughts of everything she wanted to say, every injustice she had witnessed, every story she had heard over the past days. Taking a steadying breath, she began. "Thank you all for standing here today," she said, her voice strong and unwavering. "I know many of you have faced similar experiences, whether you've been unfairly targeted, dismissed, or treated as if you didn't belong in your own community. This fight isn't just mine. It's all of ours. Together, we're demanding a safer, fairer, and more just Baywood. The crowd erupted in applause, cheers of agreement ringing out as Lisa continued. Our community deserves law enforcement officers who don't see us as threats because of our skin color or background. We deserve to walk down the street, to visit the park, to live our lives without fear. And today, we're here to demand that our voices be heard. She looked out over the crowd, seeing familiar faces and strangers alike, all of them united in purpose. We won't be silent. We won't back down. This is our community, and we're here to make it better, for ourselves and for the generations to come. The cheers and applause swelled, a powerful sound that filled the street. Lisa handed the microphone back to Rebecca, stepping back to absorb the energy and emotion of the moment. This was more than she had ever expected, more than she had dared to hope for. Her fight had become a movement, one that was growing stronger by the hour. In the days that followed, the pressure on the Baywood Police Department mounted. Community meetings were held at local churches and schools, gathering hundreds who came to share their experiences and support the movement. Social media lit up with personal stories of racial profiling, wrongful arrests, and the fear that many felt under the watch of a department they once trusted. National civil rights organizations reached out, offering support, legal resources, and public advocacy. Baywood's story gained traction beyond local borders, drawing the attention of politicians, activists, and journalists eager to expose the deep-seated problems in policing and accountability. One evening, as Lisa prepared for bed, her phone buzzed with a message from Carter. "Lisa, we're organizing a press conference with civil rights leaders. They want you to speak." She stared at the message for a moment, realizing just how far this had come. This was no longer just about her. This was about changing the lives of countless people. The impact of her decision to speak out was spreading like ripples in a pond, touching people she would never meet, creating a wave of demand for justice. The following day, she met with Carter and a group of civil rights advocates who had traveled to Baywood to join the fight. Among them were lawyers, community organizers, and even a retired judge who had spent decades advocating for police reform. They discussed strategies, messaging, and the broader implications of the movement. Lisa listened, absorbing their wisdom and expertise, humbled to be among people who had dedicated their lives to the same ideals she held dear. As they prepared for the press conference, Lisa felt a mix of nerves and excitement. Standing before the gathered reporters, she took her place behind the podium, flanked by a coalition of advocates and allies who believed in the cause. "I stand here today not just as a federal agent, but as a member of this community," she began, her voice carrying across the room. "This isn't a story of one incident. It's a story of systemic injustice, a story that has played out across our nation in countless communities. We're here today to say that we won't let it continue. We're demanding accountability, transparency, and an end to the cycle of abuse and neglect." Her words rang out with conviction, her voice steady, her resolve unbreakable. She had become more than just a victim. She had become a leader in a movement for justice and reform. And as the flash of cameras captured her determined expression, Lisa knew there was no turning back. The press conference was a turning point, solidifying the movement's demands and placing Baywood in the national spotlight. The pressure on the Baywood Police Department intensified, and with it, the demand for change. As the conference concluded, Lisa joined her colleagues and supporters, each of them sharing the knowledge that they were part of something transformative. Together, they were pushing against the weight of a long-standing system, demanding that it be reshaped to truly serve and protect all people. Walking away from the podium, Lisa felt a renewed sense of purpose. The community had spoken, and now, Baywood's future was at a crossroads. With each person she had met, each voice she had heard, she knew that this fight would continue until justice and accountability became more than just words on a page. They would become reality. The morning of the press conference dawned clear and bright. with a fresh breeze sweeping through Baywood, carrying with it the murmurs of an eager and restless community. The auditorium buzzed with reporters, activists, local leaders, and residents, some seated, others standing along the walls. Rows of television cameras were set up to broadcast the event live, their lenses focused on the stage where Lisa and her team would soon address the public. Lisa took a deep breath as she prepared herself backstage, smoothing down her blazer and glancing at the notes she had jotted down the night before. The support and attention surrounding her case had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. Baywood was in the national spotlight, and people were watching closely to see what she would say. This was her chance to amplify the voices of those who'd suffered in silence, to demand justice not only for herself but for the countless others affected by racial profiling and abuse of power. Beside her, Special Agent Carter gave her a reassuring nod. "You've got this, Lisa. Just remember, you're not speaking alone. You have a community behind you, and they believe in what you're doing." Lisa nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. She wasn't just here as a federal agent. She was here as a daughter, a neighbor, a friend, and a member of a community that was done being silent. Rebecca, who had been tirelessly organizing behind the scenes, joined them, her face determined. "The room is packed, Lisa, and we've got support from several national civil rights organizations. They'll be here today, standing with you on stage." Hearing this, Lisa felt a surge of confidence. She took another steadying breath, straightened her shoulders, and gave a nod to the coordinator at the door, signaling she was ready. The coordinator called the room to attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. We're here to address an urgent matter, one that has affected not only Agent Lisa Mitchell but also countless individuals across our community and beyond. Please welcome Special Agent Lisa Mitchell." Applause erupted as Lisa walked onto the stage, her heart pounding but her expression calm and resolute. She scanned the audience, taking in the mix of familiar and unfamiliar faces, each of them united in purpose. At the podium, she adjusted the microphone, waiting for the crowd to settle. The silence grew as everyone's attention focused on her. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice clear and steady. "My name is Lisa Mitchell, and I am a special agent with the FBI. But today, I'm not just standing here as an agent. I'm here as a Black woman, a daughter, a member of Baywood, and a representative for everyone who has felt the sting of racial profiling and injustice." She paused, letting her words sink in, the gravity of her voice capturing the room. "A few days ago, I was wrongfully detained by an officer who saw only the color of my skin, not the person I am or the career I've built. I was humiliated, cuffed, and dragged to a precinct where I was treated like a criminal simply for walking through my own neighborhood. I've dedicated my life to justice. Yet, in those moments, justice was denied to me." A murmur rippled through the crowd, an uneasy mix of empathy and anger. "But this isn't about me," Lisa continued, her gaze steady. "It's about every person who has been targeted, every family that has been torn apart, every community that has lived in fear because of unchecked power and racial bias. This is about a system that has too often failed the people it's meant to protect." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. "Officer David Jenkins, the man who detained me, is not an isolated case," she said, her voice gaining strength. "He's part of a larger system that has allowed officers to act without accountability, that has swept countless complaints under the rug, and that has denied justice to people who have done nothing wrong." Lisa's voice trembled slightly with emotion, but she pressed on, determined to make her message clear. This isn't just about removing one officer from duty. It's about demanding accountability from a system that has ignored the voices of the people it's sworn to serve. It's about calling for transparency, for reform, and for a commitment to treat every person with dignity and respect. The crowd erupted into applause, cheers ringing out as the message resonated. She could feel the energy in the room, the passion and determination of a community ready to stand up. As the applause died down, Lisa took a steadying breath, continuing, "Today, we're asking the Baywood Police Department to place Officer Jenkins on administrative leave pending a full investigation into his record and conduct. We're calling for a comprehensive review of all complaints of racial profiling and excessive force within the department. We're demanding that our police force be held to the highest standards, with oversight to ensure they serve our community without bias." The cameras flashed, capturing every word, every expression as the press absorbed her demands. One by one, community leaders took the stage, echoing her call for justice. Activists spoke passionately about their own experiences, sharing stories of loved ones wrongfully detained or mistreated, each voice amplifying the movement that Lisa had ignited. When it was Carter's turn, he approached the podium, his voice firm and unwavering. "As a federal agent, I've worked alongside law enforcement my entire career. I believe in the mission to serve and protect. But when that mission is compromised by bias and injustice, it is our duty to confront it. This isn't just about Baywood. It's about setting a standard that can be a model for communities everywhere." Rebecca followed, addressing the crowd with conviction. "We're here to demand a system that is fair and just. We're not asking for special treatment, we're asking for equal treatment. For all people in our community to be seen and respected. It's time to create a police force that genuinely reflects and serves everyone, not just a select few." The applause grew louder with each speaker, a crescendo of voices united in a call for change. For the first time, Lisa felt that change was possible. This wasn't just an isolated effort. It was a movement, and she was at its center, surrounded by people who believed in the cause just as fiercely as she did. When the last speaker finished, Lisa returned to the podium, her voice filled with resolve. "This is only the beginning. We're here to ensure that the Baywood Police Department hears us, that they understand this is more than a moment, it's a movement. We will keep demanding, keep speaking, keep pushing until real change is made. Together, we are powerful. Together, we are unstoppable." As her words echoed through the room, the crowd rose to their feet, a standing ovation that lasted long after she stepped away from the microphone. The energy was electric, a shared sense of purpose that fueled each person in the room. After the press conference, Lisa was approached by reporters, community leaders, and even strangers who wanted to thank her, to share their own stories, to lend their support. She spoke with them all, listening, absorbing each story that strengthened her resolve to see this fight through to the end. That evening, Lisa returned home, exhausted but exhilarated. She sat down at her kitchen table, sifting through the messages that continued to pour in: emails, texts, social media posts, each one a testament to the impact of her words. She could see the fire she had sparked, the hope she had rekindled in people who had grown weary of waiting for justice. Her phone rang, and she answered to hear Carter's voice on the other end. "Lisa, you were incredible today. We're already hearing back from the department. They've been flooded with calls. And there's no way they can ignore this now." Lisa closed her eyes, relief washing over her. "Thank you, Carter. I couldn't have done it without you and Rebecca." He paused, his tone softening. "Just remember, this is only the beginning. The pressure's on, and we're going to need every ounce of support we can get. They'll try to push back, to undermine what we're doing. But if we stay focused, we can make real change." Lisa nodded, a smile playing on her lips. "I know, and I'm ready." As she hung up, Lisa felt a calm determination settle over her. She had spoken her truth, and her words had resonated, sending ripples of change through Baywood and beyond. This fight would be long, and the obstacles would be many, but she was no longer alone. She had the strength of her community, her colleagues, and a growing movement behind her. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope that justice was within reach, not just for herself but for everyone who had ever been wronged. And as she sat there in the quiet of her home, she knew with unwavering certainty that she would see this through to the end. The morning of the press conference dawned clear and bright. with a fresh breeze sweeping through Baywood, carrying with it the murmurs of an eager and restless community. The auditorium buzzed with reporters, activists, local leaders, and residents, some seated, others standing along the walls. Rows of television cameras were set up to broadcast the event live, their lenses focused on the stage where Lisa and her team would soon address the public. Lisa took a deep breath as she prepared herself backstage, smoothing down her blazer and glancing at the notes she had jotted down the night before. The support and attention surrounding her case had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. Baywood was in the national spotlight, and people were watching closely to see what she would say. This was her chance to amplify the voices of those who'd suffered in silence, to demand justice not only for herself but for the countless others affected by racial profiling and abuse of power. Beside her, Special Agent Carter gave her a reassuring nod. "You've got this, Lisa. Just remember, you're not speaking alone. You have a community behind you, and they believe in what you're doing." Lisa nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. She wasn't just here as a federal agent. She was here as a daughter, a neighbor, a friend, and a member of a community that was done being silent. Rebecca, who had been tirelessly organizing behind the scenes, joined them, her face determined. "The room is packed, Lisa, and we've got support from several national civil rights organizations. They'll be here today, standing with you on stage." Hearing this, Lisa felt a surge of confidence. She took another steadying breath, straightened her shoulders, and gave a nod to the coordinator at the door, signaling she was ready. The coordinator called the room to attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. We're here to address an urgent matter, one that has affected not only Agent Lisa Mitchell but also countless individuals across our community and beyond. Please welcome Special Agent Lisa Mitchell." Applause erupted as Lisa walked onto the stage, her heart pounding but her expression calm and resolute. She scanned the audience, taking in the mix of familiar and unfamiliar faces, each of them united in purpose. At the podium, she adjusted the microphone, waiting for the crowd to settle. The silence grew as everyone's attention focused on her. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice clear and steady. "My name is Lisa Mitchell, and I am a special agent with the FBI. But today, I'm not just standing here as an agent. I'm here as a Black woman, a daughter, a member of Baywood, and a representative for everyone who has felt the sting of racial profiling and injustice." She paused, letting her words sink in, the gravity of her voice capturing the room. "A few days ago, I was wrongfully detained by an officer who saw only the color of my skin, not the person I am or the career I've built. I was humiliated, cuffed, and dragged to a precinct where I was treated like a criminal simply for walking through my own neighborhood. I've dedicated my life to justice. Yet, in those moments, justice was denied to me." A murmur rippled through the crowd, an uneasy mix of empathy and anger. "But this isn't about me," Lisa continued, her gaze steady. "It's about every person who has been targeted, every family that has been torn apart, every community that has lived in fear because of unchecked power and racial bias. This is about a system that has too often failed the people it's meant to protect." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. "Officer David Jenkins, the man who detained me, is not an isolated case," she said, her voice gaining strength. "He's part of a larger system that has allowed officers to act without accountability, that has swept countless complaints under the rug, and that has denied justice to people who have done nothing wrong." Lisa's voice trembled slightly with emotion, but she pressed on, determined to make her message clear. This isn't just about removing one officer from duty. It's about demanding accountability from a system that has ignored the voices of the people it's sworn to serve. It's about calling for transparency, for reform, and for a commitment to treat every person with dignity and respect. The crowd erupted into applause, cheers ringing out as the message resonated. She could feel the energy in the room, the passion and determination of a community ready to stand up. As the applause died down, Lisa took a steadying breath, continuing, "Today, we're asking the Baywood Police Department to place Officer Jenkins on administrative leave pending a full investigation into his record and conduct. We're calling for a comprehensive review of all complaints of racial profiling and excessive force within the department. We're demanding that our police force be held to the highest standards, with oversight to ensure they serve our community without bias." The cameras flashed, capturing every word, every expression as the press absorbed her demands. One by one, community leaders took the stage, echoing her call for justice. Activists spoke passionately about their own experiences, sharing stories of loved ones wrongfully detained or mistreated, each voice amplifying the movement that Lisa had ignited. When it was Carter's turn, he approached the podium, his voice firm and unwavering. "As a federal agent, I've worked alongside law enforcement my entire career. I believe in the mission to serve and protect. But when that mission is compromised by bias and injustice, it is our duty to confront it. This isn't just about Baywood. It's about setting a standard that can be a model for communities everywhere." Rebecca followed, addressing the crowd with conviction. "We're here to demand a system that is fair and just. We're not asking for special treatment, we're asking for equal treatment. For all people in our community to be seen and respected. It's time to create a police force that genuinely reflects and serves everyone, not just a select few." The applause grew louder with each speaker. A crescendo of voices united in a call for change. For the first time, Lisa felt that change was possible. This wasn't just an isolated effort. It was a movement, and she was at its center, surrounded by people who believed in the cause just as fiercely as she did. When the last speaker finished, Lisa returned to the podium, her voice filled with resolve. "This is only the beginning. We're here to ensure that the Baywood Police Department hears us, that they understand this is more than a moment, it's a movement. We will keep demanding, keep speaking, keep pushing until real change is made. Together, we are powerful. Together, we are unstoppable." As her words echoed through the room, the crowd rose to their feet, a standing ovation that lasted long after she stepped away from the microphone. The energy was electric, a shared sense of purpose that fueled each person in the room. After the press conference, Lisa was approached by reporters, community leaders, and even strangers who wanted to thank her, to share their own stories, to lend their support. She spoke with them all, listening, absorbing each story that strengthened her resolve to see this fight through to the end. That evening, Lisa returned home, exhausted but exhilarated. She sat down at her kitchen table, sifting through the messages that continued to pour in: emails, texts, social media posts, each one a testament to the impact of her words. She could see the fire she had sparked, the hope she had rekindled in people who had grown weary of waiting for justice. Her phone rang, and she answered to hear Carter's voice on the other end. "Lisa, you were incredible today. We're already hearing back from the department. They've been flooded with calls. And there's no way they can ignore this now." Lisa closed her eyes, relief washing over her. "Thank you, Carter. I couldn't have done it without you and Rebecca." He paused, his tone softening. "Just remember, this is only the beginning. The pressure's on, and we're going to need every ounce of support we can get. They'll try to push back, to undermine what we're doing. But if we stay focused, we can make real change." Lisa nodded, a smile playing on her lips. "I know, and I'm ready." As she hung up, Lisa felt a calm determination settle over her. She had spoken her truth, and her words had resonated, sending ripples of change through Baywood and beyond. This fight would be long, and the obstacles would be many, but she was no longer alone. She had the strength of her community, her colleagues, and a growing movement behind her. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope that justice was within reach, not just for herself but for everyone who had ever been wronged. And as she sat there in the quiet of her home, she knew with unwavering certainty that she would see this through to the end. The findings from the task force investigation were nothing short of explosive. Released in a public report, the document detailed years of misconduct within the Baywood Police Department: racial profiling, abuse of power, falsified reports, and systemic negligence. News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting the shocking revelations across the country. Baywood had become the epicenter of a conversation about policing, accountability, and systemic reform. Lisa watched the coverage unfold from her office, a mix of satisfaction and resolve tightening her chest. She had known, deep down, that Jenkins was only a symptom of a larger issue, but seeing it all documented in black and white filled her with a renewed determination to push for lasting change. Carter and Rebecca entered her office, each holding a copy of the report. Carter's expression was grim, though his eyes carried a spark of hope. "This report is exactly what we needed. Lisa, they can't ignore it anymore. This is the ammunition we needed to force real reform." Rebecca nodded in agreement, a fierce determination in her eyes. "The community is outraged, and we have allies coming out in droves. Local organizations, national civil rights groups, and even members of the city council are backing us. We need to use this momentum wisely." Lisa took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "Then let's mobilize. We need to bring everyone together and present a clear, actionable plan for reform. This isn't just about firing Jenkins or making empty promises. We need a complete overhaul of the Baywood PD's practices." The three of them spent the next several hours developing a strategy, detailing a series of reforms that would address every facet of the department's issues. Their plan included mandatory bias training, the establishment of a civilian oversight board, an independent review process for complaints, and body cameras for every officer on duty. They drafted each demand with care, ensuring that the proposed changes would be comprehensive and enforceable. The following weekend, Lisa and her team organized a community forum to present the reform plan and gather feedback. Held at the Baywood Community Center, the event was packed with residents, activists, and local leaders, all eager to voice their concerns and support the push for change. The energy in the room was palpable, a shared sense of purpose that seemed to resonate in every corner of the hall. As Lisa stepped up to the microphone, the crowd fell silent, their eyes fixed on her with anticipation. She cleared her throat, her voice steady as she addressed them. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her gaze moving across the room. "This report confirms what many of us have known for years, that our police department has failed us. This isn't just about Officer Jenkins or one incident. It's about a system that has allowed misconduct and abuse to thrive unchecked. But we are here today because we believe we can make a change. Together, we can demand a department that serves and protects all of us." Applause broke out, punctuated by shouts of agreement and support. Lisa continued, her voice gaining strength. "We've drafted a reform plan, and we need your voices, your feedback, and your support to make it happen. This is our community, and we have the power to shape it into one we can all feel safe in, regardless of race, background, or neighborhood." Rebecca passed out copies of the reform plan to the crowd, and people began reading over it, murmuring to one another as they considered each demand. Carter stepped forward, gesturing to a slide on the screen behind him. "We are calling for the immediate establishment of a civilian oversight board," he explained. "This board will consist of community members, including individuals who have been directly impacted by police actions. They will have the authority to review complaints and ensure transparency within the department." A man in the audience raised his hand, his expression skeptical. "How do we know this board will actually have power? We've seen oversight boards formed before, only to be ignored by the department." Lisa nodded, acknowledging his concern. "That's a valid point. We're proposing that the board be given independent authority, separate from the Baywood PD, with access to all records and the power to recommend disciplinary actions. This isn't a token gesture, this is real accountability." Rebecca chimed in, pointing to another slide. We're also demanding that every officer complete mandatory training on racial bias
2. Escalation technique.
and cultural sensitivity. This training will be ongoing, not just a one-time session, so that officers are continuously held to the highest standards. The crowd responded positively, nodding and murmuring their agreement. An older woman in the front row raised her hand, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "I've lived in Baywood my whole life," she said, "and I want to believe things can change. But what about the officers who don't want to change? The ones who think they're above the law?" Lisa's gaze softened as she responded. "We're asking the department to establish a zero-tolerance policy for misconduct. Officers who engage in racial profiling, excessive force, or any form of abuse will be held accountable. We're not just asking for training, we're demanding consequences." As more questions poured in, Lisa, Carter, and Rebecca took turns addressing each one, ensuring that every person felt heard. The reform plan was met with overwhelming support, and by the end of the night, the community was fully engaged, ready to take action alongside them. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Lisa and her team organized protests, held press conferences, and rallied support for their reform plan. Social media campaigns took off, with residents and supporters sharing their own stories of police misconduct, amplifying the message that Baywood was ready for change. In response, the Baywood Police Department faced increasing scrutiny from local officials, who recognized the public's demands could no longer be ignored. Under pressure, the department announced it would implement several of the reform measures, including the Oversight Board and the new training program. But Lisa and her team knew better than to accept promises at face value. They continued to press for more concrete action, meeting with members of the city council and collaborating with legal advisors to draft policies that would enforce accountability. One evening, as Lisa was preparing to leave the office, her phone rang. It was Judge Edwards, the former judge who had led the task force investigation.
Lisa.
"I wanted to reach out to let you know that the city council will be holding a vote on your reform plan next week," he informed her. "And there's substantial support. I believe you may just pull this off." Lisa felt a surge of relief and excitement. "Thank you, Judge Edwards. We couldn't have gotten this far without your help." He paused, his tone sincere. "You've inspired something far greater than any one person could have achieved. What you're doing here is setting a precedent. Other communities are already looking to Baywood as a model for change." As she hung up, Lisa felt a deep sense of accomplishment, tempered by the knowledge that there was still work to be done. This was the moment they had been fighting for, a chance to secure lasting reform, not only for Baywood but for every town and city that looked to them for inspiration. The day of the city council vote arrived, and the streets surrounding City Hall were filled with people, their voices unified as they chanted for justice and accountability. Signs bearing slogans like "Reform Now" and "End Police Impunity" were held high as the crowd waited for the council members to make their decision. Lisa stood at the front of the crowd, surrounded by friends, colleagues, and supporters who had become like family. Rebecca and Carter were beside her, their expressions a mix of hope and determination. They knew the vote could change everything. Inside City Hall, council members debated the reform plan, weighing the community's demands against the pushback from some within the police department. Tensions were high, but the overwhelming public support left little room for doubt. When the final vote was announced, passed with a clear majority, the reforms would be implemented. Cheers erupted outside, a wave of relief and celebration washing over the crowd. Lisa felt tears prick her eyes as the weight of the victory settled in. She had fought for this alongside her community, and together, they had won. As the crowd began to disperse, people approached Lisa, thanking her, sharing their gratitude, and expressing their renewed hope for the future of Baywood. She hugged each person, feeling a deep connection to the community she had fought so hard to protect. Rebecca clapped her on the back, a wide smile on her face. "You did it, Lisa. We did it." Carter nodded, his voice full of pride. This is only the beginning. We've set a standard here that other communities can follow. This isn't just a victory for Baywood. It's a victory for everyone who believes in justice. Lisa looked out over the crowd, feeling the strength of their unity and the power of their voices. They had turned a moment of injustice into a movement for change, proving that a determined community could make a difference. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city, Lisa knew that their work was far from over. But for the first time, she felt a profound sense of hope. Baywood was on a new path, one paved by the courage and resilience of its people. And together, they had built a future worth fighting for. The news of the city council's approval of the reform plan had spread quickly, igniting excitement and relief throughout Baywood. People were feeling hopeful about the future, and Lisa's case had become a symbol of resilience and the power of community. To celebrate the victory and keep the momentum alive, Lisa, her colleagues, and local organizers planned a large rally in front of the Baywood Police Department. This gathering would serve as a powerful reminder that the community's watchful eyes would ensure these reforms weren't just words on paper. As Lisa prepared for the rally that morning, she felt a mix of excitement and resolve. Her fight for justice had resonated with people far beyond Baywood, drawing attention from activists, leaders, and supporters from neighboring towns and even other states. She knew this wasn't just a rally. It was a call to accountability that the entire nation was watching. That afternoon, the rally began, and a crowd quickly gathered, swelling in number with every passing minute. People held signs that read, "Accountability for all," "Justice for Baywood," and "End police impunity." Banners and posters waved above the crowd, their messages unified in purpose. Chants filled the air, their words echoing off the buildings and carrying through the streets. Lisa stood on the steps of the police department, flanked by Carter, Rebecca, and other community leaders. She scanned the crowd, her heart swelling with pride. This movement had grown far beyond her own story. It was a symbol of hope for everyone who had ever felt unseen, silenced, or oppressed. She took a deep breath, readying herself to speak to the crowd. But as she stepped forward, she noticed a group of officers, led by none other than David Jenkins, standing nearby. His expression was hard, defiant, and filled with anger. She wasn't surprised. Jenkins had been placed on administrative leave, but he still had a following within the department. A few officers, loyal to him and resentful of the reforms, had begun to publicly voice their discontent, accusing the movement of attacking the police. Jenkins crossed his arms, his posture confrontational as he made his way toward the front of the crowd. His voice, loud and dripping with scorn, cut through the rally's chants. "So this is what you wanted, huh?" he sneered, his gaze fixed on Lisa. "You think parading around and stirring up trouble is going to make a difference?" The crowd fell silent, eyes turning to Lisa and Jenkins. Tension thickened in the air, and a murmur of unease rippled through the audience. Lisa held her ground, meeting Jenkins's gaze without flinching. "We're not here to cause trouble, Jenkins," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "We're here to demand accountability. This community deserves officers who protect them, not target them." Jenkins scoffed, his lips twisting into a smirk. "You think you're some kind of hero? All you've done is make life harder for every officer here. People like you have no respect for the sacrifices we make." Lisa felt a wave of frustration rise within her, but she refused to let it show. She knew Jenkins was trying to provoke her, to make her appear hostile or unreasonable. She steadied her voice, choosing her words carefully. "Respect is earned by protecting and serving the community, not by abusing power," she said, her tone unwavering. "This isn't about undermining law enforcement. It's about ensuring that officers uphold the values they've sworn to protect." The crowd cheered, their support and energy flowing toward her like a wave. Jenkins's face twisted with anger, but before he could respond, Chief Martinez emerged from the police department, flanked by a group of officers who had been working closely with Lisa on the reforms. Her presence commanded respect, and the crowd fell quiet once more. Chief Martinez raised her hand, her voice clear and authoritative. "Officer Jenkins, this is a peaceful rally, and you are to respect the community's right to assemble. I suggest you step back." Jenkins's eyes narrowed, a flicker of resentment in his gaze, but he held his ground. "With all due respect, Chief, I don't see why we should stand by while our own department is attacked. We're being vilified by people who don't understand the realities of this job." Chief Martinez's expression hardened. "No one is above accountability. Officer Jenkins, the community has a right to voice their concerns, and our department has a responsibility to listen. That's the reality of the job. And if you can't accept that, then perhaps you're not fit to serve." Jenkins glared at her, his face flushed with anger. He muttered something under his breath before taking a step back. Though his defiance was evident, the crowd watched, captivated by the confrontation, their support for Chief Martinez and Lisa clear in their eyes. Lisa seized the opportunity, stepping back up to the microphone. "This is what change looks like," she said, her voice resonating with strength. "It's not easy, and it's not comfortable, but it's necessary. We're here because we believe in accountability, in transparency, and in a system that serves everyone. This isn't about targeting officers. It's about creating a safer, fairer community." The crowd erupted into cheers, their energy renewed and emboldened. Lisa continued, speaking from the heart, her words carrying the weight of her experience and the passion of her convictions. "We're not here to tear anyone down," she said, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "We're here to build something better. We're here to create a community where people can walk without fear, where trust is restored, and where justice is real. And together, we're going to make that happen." As the crowd cheered, Lisa felt a surge of strength, fueled by the unity and resolve around her. Chief Martinez stepped up beside her, a supportive hand on her shoulder as she addressed the audience. "Our department is committed to these reforms," Chief Martinez said, her voice firm. "We've heard you, and we're making changes to ensure that your concerns are not only acknowledged but addressed. This is a partnership between law enforcement and the community, and we are dedicated to making Baywood a place where everyone feels safe and respected." The applause grew, a powerful affirmation that resonated through the air. For the first time in months, Lisa felt a sense of peace. They were making progress not just in words, but in action. And while there was still work to be done, they were on the right path. As the rally began to wind down, people approached Lisa, shaking her hand, thanking her, and sharing their own stories. Each conversation reminded her of why she had started this journey, of the responsibility she had embraced to advocate for those who had been silenced or dismissed. Rebecca approached her, smiling with pride. "You handled that perfectly, Lisa. Jenkins was looking for a fight, but you didn't give him one. You stayed focused, and you showed everyone here what true leadership looks like." Lisa returned the smile, a sense of relief washing over her. "Thank you, Rebecca. I couldn't have done this without you and Carter and the community. This isn't just my fight. It's all of ours." Carter joined them, his expression thoughtful. "Today was a huge step, Lisa. The fact that the chief came out and stood with you in front of everyone, that sends a powerful message. It shows that change is happening, and it's because of the work you've done." As they stood there, watching the crowd slowly disperse, Lisa felt a profound sense of accomplishment. But she knew this wasn't the end. It was just another chapter in a much larger story. The road to justice and reform was long, and there would be challenges and resistance along the way. But she was ready for it. She turned to Rebecca and Carter, her voice filled with quiet determination. "This is just the beginning. We've set a standard, but we need to make sure these reforms are implemented fully and that they're followed through. We owe it to the community to keep fighting, to make sure that this progress is real and lasting." Carter nodded, a glint of admiration in his eyes. "I have no doubt you'll see it through. Lisa, you've already proven that you're willing to do whatever it takes. Baywood is lucky to have you." Lisa looked out at the police department, feeling the weight of everything she had accomplished and everything that lay ahead. She had gone from a victim of injustice to a leader of a movement, surrounded by people who believed in the possibility of a better future. As the last of the crowd dispersed, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. The journey wasn't over, but she was no longer walking it alone. Baywood had come together, united by a shared vision of justice and accountability, and she knew that, together, they could create a legacy of fairness and equality that would endure. With a final glance at the police department, she turned, ready to continue the work that lay ahead. Baywood had changed, and she had changed with it. This was their victory, their movement, and together, they would make sure it lasted. With the rally behind her, Lisa felt the weight of months of fighting, strategizing, and confronting injustice beginning to lift. She could finally see the change she'd been fighting for, and the Baywood community had embraced a new vision for what their future could be. The reforms had been set in motion, but Lisa knew that sustaining this momentum would require continued commitment, transparency, and unity. In the weeks following the rally, Baywood experienced a transformation that felt tangible. Officer Jenkins had been formally dismissed from the police department following the task force investigation, which had laid out undeniable evidence of his repeated abuses and misconduct. His dismissal marked a significant victory, but Lisa knew it was also a warning. The culture that had protected him would take time and vigilance to dismantle fully. Baywood Police Department's commitment to transparency began with the establishment of the Civilian Oversight Board. The board, which included activists, community leaders, and residents with direct experiences of police misconduct, held its first meeting just days after Jenkins's termination. Lisa, along with Chief Martinez and other community representatives, attended, eager to see this first step toward a collaborative relationship between law enforcement and the community. The meeting took place in a modest community center, where board members gathered around a large table. Lisa looked around the room, feeling a surge of pride as she recognized familiar faces, people who had supported her, shared their own stories, and fought alongside her. Chief Martinez opened the meeting, addressing the board with respect and humility. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice filled with sincerity. "I know the Baywood Police Department has a lot of work to do to regain the community's trust. This board represents a critical step in that journey. We're here to listen, to learn, and to make sure that we hold ourselves accountable." The board members nodded, and Lisa saw a range of emotions: hope, determination, and some lingering skepticism. She understood. Trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight, and many were still wary of the department's promises. But they were here, ready to be part of the solution, and that gave Lisa hope. The board began by reviewing the department's proposed accountability measures, which included mandatory body cameras, biannual bias training, and clear disciplinary actions for misconduct. Each policy was discussed openly, and the board members weren't shy about voicing their opinions. An elderly man named Mr. Thomas, a longtime Baywood resident and retired schoolteacher, spoke up. "We appreciate these steps, Chief," he said, his voice steady. "But words alone won't heal the hurt that's been done. I want to know how we'll hold officers accountable if these new policies are violated. What's to stop them from sweeping things under the rug like they used to?" Chief Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "Mr. Thomas, that's a valid concern. This board has the authority to review any complaints of misconduct, and I'm committed to ensuring that the board's recommendations are taken seriously. If any officer violates these policies, they'll face strict consequences, up to and including dismissal." Lisa could see that Mr. Thomas's guarded expression softened slightly. People in the room began to feel that they were not just witnesses to change but active participants. Throughout the meeting, the board members took turns sharing their stories and concerns. their voices forming a chorus of experiences and perspectives. Each story was a reminder of why they were all there, why this fight had been necessary, and why they couldn't afford to let up. The meeting concluded with a renewed sense of purpose and an agreement to meet regularly, ensuring a constant dialogue between the department and the community. Later that evening, as Lisa returned to her apartment, she reflected on everything that had led to this moment. She thought of the day she'd been wrongfully detained, the pain and humiliation she'd felt, and how that single moment had evolved into a fight for justice. Not just for herself, but for an entire community. She felt a mixture of pride and exhaustion, the weight of the journey still fresh in her mind. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Carter. "Celebration dinner tomorrow night. You in?" Lisa smiled. A celebration felt right, Carter, Rebecca, and everyone else who had stood by her deserved to commemorate the progress they'd made. She texted back a quick confirmation and set her phone down, feeling a rare sense of peace. The following evening, Lisa joined Carter, Rebecca, and a group of close friends and supporters at a cozy local restaurant. They had reserved a private room, and as everyone gathered around the table, the mood was light, filled with laughter and camaraderie. Plates of food and glasses of sparkling cider were passed around, and the room buzzed with warmth and joy. Rebecca raised her glass, looking around the room with a smile. "To Lisa," she began, her voice brimming with pride, "for being our fearless leader and showing us what it means to fight for justice. None of this would have happened without you." The room erupted in applause, everyone raising their glasses in agreement. Lisa felt her cheeks flush, humbled by the support of the people who had believed in her and fought alongside her. "Thank you, everyone," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But this victory belongs to all of us. It's because of each and every one of you that we've made it this far. We've all had a part in creating this change, and I couldn't be prouder to be part of this community." They clinked glasses, sharing a moment of celebration and unity. Laughter and stories filled the air as they enjoyed their meal. And for the first time in months, Lisa allowed herself to relax, savoring the company of people who had become her extended family. As the night wore on, Carter leaned over to Lisa, his expression thoughtful. "You know, Lisa," he said, "you've done something incredible here. You've shown people what it looks like to take a stand and refuse to back down. Baywood is a different place because of you." Lisa smiled, feeling a quiet satisfaction. "Thank you, Carter. I just wanted to make sure no one else had to go through what I did. This community deserves better, and I'm glad I could be a part of making that happen." He nodded, a glint of admiration in his eyes. "You didn't just make it happen, Lisa. You led the way, and you've inspired people, myself included, to keep pushing for what's right, no matter how difficult it gets." Lisa's heart swelled with gratitude as she looked around the room at the friends and allies who had become her family. She had started this journey in isolation, but she had ended it surrounded by people who believed in her, who had fought for her, and who had committed themselves to a vision of a better, fairer Baywood. As the evening drew to a close, Lisa stepped outside to get some air, gazing up at the night sky. The journey had been long and challenging, filled with moments of fear, doubt, and pain, but it had also brought her closer to her community, and it had ignited a movement that would leave a lasting legacy. She thought about the people she had met along the way, Evelyn Johnson and her son, Mr. Thomas, the residents who had shared their stories, and the activists who had stood by her side. They had all become part of something bigger, a shared vision for a future where justice and accountability were more than ideals. They were realities. As she stood there, Carter joined her, leaning against the railing as he looked out over the quiet street. "What's next for you, Lisa?" he asked, his tone gentle. Lisa considered his question, a smile touching her lips. "I think I'll keep doing what I've been doing, fighting for justice, but maybe on a broader scale. Baywood's journey is far from over, and neither is mine." Carter nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. I have a feeling you'll continue to make a difference. Lisa, you're a force to be reckoned with. Lisa laughed softly, her heart full. Thank you, Carter, and thank you for standing by me through all of this. I couldn't have done it without you. They shared a quiet moment, the weight of their journey shared in silence. As they walked back inside, Lisa felt a renewed sense of purpose. This chapter of her life had closed, but the story was far from over. Baywood was on a path toward a better future, and Lisa was ready to continue leading the charge for justice, wherever it took her. With her community beside her, she knew that anything was possible. This was only the beginning of her impact, and she felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that she had found her purpose. The fight for justice had changed her, and now, she was ready to change the world. The morning sun filtered through Lisa's window, casting a warm glow over her apartment. It had been weeks since the rally, the celebration dinner, and the launch of Baywood's Community Oversight Board. The town was settling into its new chapter, and the reforms were starting to take shape in meaningful ways. But even as Baywood transformed, Lisa felt the pull of something greater, an urge to take this fight for justice beyond the borders of her town. Sitting at her desk with a steaming cup of coffee, she opened her laptop to find an inbox filled with messages from people across the country. Some emails were from activists and community leaders asking for advice on how to organize their own reform movements. Others were from everyday citizens sharing their experiences of police injustice and systemic issues in their own towns. It was humbling and overwhelming, yet it gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't anticipated. As she scrolled through the messages, one email caught her eye. It was from the National Coalition for Community Justice, a large civil rights organization based in Washington, D.C. They were hosting a nationwide summit on police reform and community safety, and they wanted her to be a keynote speaker. She read the email twice, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and nerves. This was a platform that could amplify her story and the message of Baywood's movement. It was also an opportunity to connect with others who shared her vision for justice and accountability on a national scale. Later that day, Lisa met with Carter and Rebecca at a local cafe to share the news. She could hardly contain her excitement as she explained the invitation. "They want me to speak at a summit in D.C.," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "It's a chance to share our story with activists, lawmakers, and community leaders from across the country." Carter's face lit up with pride. "Lisa, that's incredible. You've turned Baywood into a model for change, and now you're taking it nationwide. This is exactly the kind of platform you deserve." Rebecca reached across the table, giving Lisa's hand a supportive squeeze. "I can't think of anyone better to lead this conversation. People need to hear about everything we've been through here, everything you've achieved. You're going to inspire so many people." Lisa felt a warmth spread through her as she took in their encouragement. She knew that this invitation was more than just a speaking engagement. It was an opportunity to expand her reach, to help other communities replicate Baywood's success, and to demand change on a broader level. A few weeks later, Lisa found herself stepping off a plane in Washington, D.C., her heart racing as she looked around the bustling airport. She felt the weight of her mission settle over her, and as she made her way to the hotel, her mind buzzed with thoughts of what she wanted to say. The summit was held in a grand conference hall filled with people from all walks of life: activists, local government officials, community organizers, and legal experts gathered, each of them united by a common purpose. Lisa could feel the energy in the air, a powerful mix of hope, urgency, and determination. As she took her place backstage, waiting to be introduced, Lisa thought back to Baywood, to the people who had shared their stories, who had fought alongside her, and who had trusted her to carry their message forward. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and reminded herself that she wasn't alone in this journey. Finally, her name was announced, and she stepped onto the stage to a round of applause. She approached the podium, looking out at the faces before her, and felt a surge of confidence as she began to speak. "Good morning. she began, her voice resonant and clear. My name is Lisa Mitchell, and I come from a town called Baywood, a town that, until recently, had allowed a culture of silence and injustice to take root in its police department. A few months ago, I was wrongfully detained by a police officer who saw only the color of my skin, not the person I am. That moment changed my life, but it also became the spark for something much greater. She paused, letting her words settle over the room, her gaze steady and determined. Baywood has become a symbol of what's possible when a community stands together for change. We've introduced reforms, established a civilian oversight board, and begun a journey to rebuild trust between our police department and the people it serves. But this fight isn't just about Baywood. It's about every community that has been hurt by bias, by unchecked power, by systems that refuse to hold themselves accountable. The crowd listened intently, their expressions reflecting a mix of empathy and resolve. We didn't accomplish this alone, Lisa continued, her voice filled with gratitude. It took the courage of individuals who spoke up, the dedication of allies who fought alongside us, and the support of leaders who chose to listen. We are stronger together, and that's why I'm here today, to share what we've learned and to ask each of you to join us in demanding a fairer, safer future for all. The room erupted into applause, and Lisa felt a wave of encouragement wash over her as she continued, sharing the specific steps they had taken in Baywood and offering advice for those looking to start similar initiatives in their own communities. She could see the audience nodding, taking notes, and exchanging glances of understanding. Her words resonated because they were grounded in real, hard-won experience, a journey that had been filled with obstacles but also triumphs. After her speech, Lisa stayed for a Q&A session, where people approached her with questions about overcoming resistance, building alliances, and staying resilient in the face of opposition. She spoke with honesty, sharing the challenges she had faced and the strategies that had helped her move forward. As the session ended, a young woman from a small town in Georgia approached Lisa, her voice filled with emotion. "Your story gives me hope," she said. "We're fighting for similar reforms back home, and it's been hard. But seeing what you've done in Baywood, it makes me believe we can do it too." Lisa placed a hand on her shoulder, meeting her gaze with sincerity. "You can do it. Change is possible, even when it feels like an uphill battle. Just remember, you're not alone. We're all in this together, and the work you're doing is just as important." The woman nodded, a determined smile breaking through her uncertainty, and Lisa felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer just the voice of Baywood. She was part of a national movement, a collective effort to reshape the way communities and law enforcement interacted across the country. Over the next few days, Lisa attended workshops, met with activists from various states, and shared her insights on panels alongside other leaders in the field. Each conversation reinforced her commitment to the cause. Each story reminded her why this fight mattered. She was part of something bigger than herself, and for the first time, she felt fully empowered by the scope of her mission. As the summit drew to a close, Lisa received another invitation, this time to join the National Coalition for Community Justice as a consultant, helping other towns implement the reforms she had championed in Baywood. It was a chance to expand her impact, to guide other communities in their journey toward accountability and justice. She took some time to consider the offer, knowing it would mean leaving her work in Baywood behind in some ways, though her heart would always remain there. After talking it over with Carter, Rebecca, and her closest friends in Baywood, she felt ready to take the leap. They encouraged her, reminding her that her work had laid a foundation in Baywood that would continue to grow and flourish even in her absence. On her last day in Baywood before officially accepting the consulting role, Lisa gathered with her team, her friends, and the people who had stood beside her from the beginning. They met in the same community center where they had held so many meetings, rallies, and discussions, their shared memories filling the room with warmth and gratitude. Standing before them, Lisa addressed the group one last time as their leader. I want to thank each of you for trusting me, for supporting me, and for sharing this journey with me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This movement isn't ending. It's just evolving. Baywood has become a model for change. And now I have the opportunity to help other communities create the same kind of progress. But I'll always carry Baywood with me. And I'll always be here whenever you need me." The room filled with applause and cheers, a final testament to the legacy Lisa was leaving behind. She hugged each person, feeling the strength of their support, the bond they had built together through months of hardship and triumph. As she left the community center that evening, Lisa looked out over the town she had called home, the place where she had found her purpose and her voice. She knew that the path ahead would be challenging, but she was ready. Her fight for justice had grown from a local battle to a national mission, and she was determined to continue pushing forward, one community at a time. With a deep breath and a heart full of gratitude, Lisa set off toward the future, ready to bring Baywood's legacy of justice, accountability, and resilience to every corner of the country. This was more than a new chapter. It was the beginning of a movement that would reach far beyond anything she had ever dreamed. Stepping into her new role as a consultant with the National Coalition for Community Justice was both exhilarating and daunting for Lisa. She had spent months working to reform the Baywood Police Department, but now her mission was broader. Her focus had shifted to a national scale, helping other communities fight for justice and accountability. As Lisa settled into her new office in Washington, D.C., the reality of her task came into sharp focus. She wasn't just advising a single town. She was taking on the deep-rooted systems of inequality and injustice embedded across the country. On her first day, Lisa attended a strategy meeting with the coalition's executive team and several prominent civil rights leaders, many of whom had followed her work in Baywood closely. The room was filled with passionate advocates, each bringing their own expertise to the table. She could feel the energy and urgency as they discussed their goals for the upcoming year. From policy changes to grassroots initiatives, the coalition's director, Evelyn Marsh, a seasoned lawyer and former civil rights activist, led the meeting. Her presence was calm yet powerful, her words measured and focused.
Lisa,
"We're thrilled to have you here," Evelyn began, smiling warmly. "You've done incredible work in Baywood, and I believe your experience will be invaluable as we tackle these challenges on a broader scale." Lisa nodded, feeling both honored and determined. "Thank you, Evelyn. I'm here because I believe in the work this coalition is doing. I've seen firsthand what a difference community-led reforms can make, and I'm ready to help other towns achieve the same success." Evelyn nodded approvingly, then gestured to a map on the wall, dotted with markers representing cities and towns where local groups had requested assistance. "As you can see, we have requests for support all over the country. Each one of these communities is facing unique challenges, but the underlying issues are often the same: lack of accountability, biased policing, and limited resources for reform." Another member of the team, Jamal Harris, a data analyst who specialized in tracking patterns of misconduct within police departments, spoke up. "We've identified 10 cities as priority areas. Each of these cities has high rates of documented police complaints, racial profiling, and minimal oversight. If we can work with them to implement reforms, they could become models for the rest of the country, just like Baywood." Lisa studied the map, her mind racing with possibilities. She could see the potential to create lasting change, but she also understood the complexity of the task. Each town, each community would require a tailored approach, and success would depend on collaboration, resilience, and trust. "We'll start by forming partnerships with local leaders and activists in each of these areas," Evelyn continued. "Lisa, your first assignment will be Southwood, a small town in Tennessee with a history of racial tension and limited police oversight. They've requested our help to build a framework for reform, but they're facing significant resistance from some within the police department." Lisa took a deep breath, nodding. Southwood sounded a lot like Baywood had been before the reforms took hold. She felt a familiar determination ignite within her. "I'll do whatever it takes to support Southwood," she replied. "I know change is hard, but if Baywood taught me anything, it's that people are willing to fight for a better future when they know they're not alone." A week later, Lisa arrived in Southwood, her heart racing with anticipation. The town was smaller than Baywood, with a tightly knit community that was wary of outsiders. She met with Mayor Joan West, a straightforward woman in her 50s who had been pushing for reform for years, often facing backlash from both the police force and certain members of the town council. "Thank you for coming, Lisa," Mayor West said as they sat down together in her modest office. "I've heard about the work you did in Baywood, and I can't tell you how much we need that kind of dedication here. People have been demanding change, but every attempt has been met with resistance." Lisa nodded, understanding the frustration all too well. "I know how hard it is, Mayor West. Baywood wasn't easy either, but if we work together and keep the community involved, we can make this happen." The mayor's face softened, her expression hopeful. "That's what we need, hope. People here are tired. They're tired of being ignored, and they're tired of feeling like they're fighting a losing battle." Over the next few days, Lisa held meetings with local activists, church leaders, and concerned residents who shared their stories and their desire for a safer, fairer Southwood. She could see the same determination in their eyes that she had seen in the people of Baywood, and it gave her confidence that Southwood was ready for change. But there was one major obstacle: Chief Marcus Dixon, the head of the Southwood Police Department, a traditionalist with decades on the force. Chief Dixon had publicly dismissed calls for reform, claiming that the community's concerns were overblown. He saw the coalition's presence as a threat, and it was clear that he wasn't going to cooperate easily. Lisa arranged a meeting with him, hoping to find common ground. She entered his office, her posture steady, her expression calm. "Thank you for meeting with me, Chief Dixon," she began, extending her hand. He shook it briefly, his face impassive. "I understand you're here to tell us how to do our jobs," he said, his tone guarded. "Not at all," Lisa replied, maintaining her composure. "I'm here to help bridge the gap between the department and the community. Southwood is looking for accountability and fairness, and I believe that's something we can work on together." Chief Dixon's expression hardened. "I don't need outsiders telling me how to run my department. I know this community, and I know what works." Lisa took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I understand that you have years of experience, Chief, and I respect that. But change doesn't mean we're here to dismantle what you've built. It means we're here to strengthen it. We're here to create trust and transparency so that the community feels safe and supported by their police." Dixon regarded her in silence, his posture tense. "I've heard this talk before, Ms. Mitchell. It's all just words." She met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "I was wrongfully detained in my own neighborhood. Chief, this isn't just words for me. It's personal. And I believe that if you work with us, you'll see that accountability can build respect, not undermine it." The silence between them stretched, and for a moment, Lisa wasn't sure he'd respond. But finally, he gave a reluctant nod. "Fine," he said gruffly. "I'll give you a chance to show me what this accountability looks like. But if it disrupts my department, I'll shut it down." Lisa accepted his conditions, knowing this was a tentative first step. "Thank you, Chief Dixon. I look forward to working together." In the following weeks, Lisa set up community forums, inviting residents to share their experiences and outline their hopes for reform. These sessions were often emotionally charged, filled with stories of profiling, harassment, and fear, but also with resilience and determination. Each forum reinforced the community's commitment to change, and slowly, a shift began to take root in Southwood. Lisa worked closely with Mayor West and a team of local leaders to draft a reform plan. Much like the one they had implemented in Baywood, they included measures for a civilian oversight board, mandatory training on bias and de-escalation, and clear, transparent procedures for handling complaints. At each step, Chief Dixon observed closely, sometimes voicing his reservations but mostly watching as the community began to respond positively to the changes. The Oversight Board, in particular, garnered support from residents, who felt empowered knowing they would have a say in holding the department accountable. One evening, after a particularly successful forum, Chief Dixon approached Lisa as she was packing up her materials. His face was thoughtful, his tone softened. "I'll admit, I didn't think this would work," he said. "I've been doing this job for a long time, and I thought I knew what was best for Southwood. But seeing the community respond like this, maybe there's something to what you're doing here." Lisa smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "I know change is hard, Chief, but it doesn't have to be divisive. It's about creating a system that works for everyone." He nodded slowly, the tension between them finally easing. "Maybe I was wrong to resist so much. If this is what the community needs, then I'll support it." The reforms in Southwood took hold, gradually transforming the relationship between the police department and the community. Chief Dixon, once a vocal opponent, became an advocate for accountability, working with Lisa to ensure the policies were implemented effectively. The Community Oversight Board became an integral part of Southwood's governance, and the town felt safer, more united. Lisa's work in Southwood became a blueprint for other towns, and soon, requests from other cities began pouring in. She traveled across the country, each new place presenting unique challenges, but all united by a common goal: justice, accountability, and respect for every individual. Each community she visited reminded her of Baywood, of the people who had inspired her journey and shown her the power of resilience. As she helped others implement the changes they sought, she felt an unbreakable bond with the movement she had sparked, a movement that had grown beyond her, connecting people across the nation in their shared pursuit of a just and equitable future. And with each town that embraced change, Lisa knew her journey was far from over. She was no longer just an advocate for Baywood. She was a force for transformation, bringing hope, justice, and lasting change to communities across America. The path was long, but she was ready for every step, driven by the belief that together, they could build a future where justice truly served everyone.